In the year 2012, the United States government issued a check for $104 million. It was not a corporate bailout. It was not a military grant. And it certainly was not given to a national hero. It was sent to a federal inmate, prisoner number 03975-018, a man sitting in a cramped concrete cell in Pennsylvania, eating standard-issue prison food. Why would the most powerful government on earth pay a convicted felon an amount of money that most countries cannot even afford to spend on their entire defense budgets? The answer requires us to look away from the noisy, violent crimes that dominate the evening news. True power does not announce itself with sirens. It operates in total silence. It operates in the mahogany boardrooms of Geneva. It operates behind layers of encryption, offshore shell companies, and the legendary secrecy of Swiss banking. For decades, the world's wealthiest individuals possessed a very quiet advantage. They could make their fortunes simply disappear from the eyes of the tax collectors. The mechanism was elegantly simple, yet deeply impenetrable. You do not just walk into a bank in Switzerland with a suitcase of cash. You are invited. And once you are inside, your money becomes a ghost. This was the domain of UBS, a financial leviathan, a fortress of absolute discretion. To be a wealth manager at UBS was to be an ordained priest in the religion of wealth. You were not just managing portfolios. You were managing dark secrets. You were shielding the fortunes of billionaires and real estate tycoons from the grasping hands of their home governments. In 2001, a man named Bradley Birkenfeld stepped into this exclusive world. He joined UBS as a private banker. If you are looking for a moral crusader, you are in the wrong story. Birkenfeld was a creature of this ecosystem. He thrived in it. He intimately understood the unspoken rules of the game. His job was to help wealthy Americans conceal their assets offshore. He did not just open accounts. He facilitated the invisible movement of capital. According to his own later admissions and court records, he was the man who would purchase diamonds using client funds, stuff those diamonds into tubes of toothpaste, and smuggle them across international borders, all just to ensure the paper trail remained entirely severed. He was deeply, undeniably compromised. He was a highly paid gear in the very machinery that was bleeding his own country dry. But there is a fatal flaw in the architecture of total secrecy. When a system is designed to hide everything from the outside world, it also becomes the perfect place to hide betrayals from within. By the mid-2000s, the geopolitical winds were shifting. The United States Department of Justice, along with the Internal Revenue Service, began to slowly tighten the noose around offshore tax evasion. They were asking questions. They were applying legal pressure. And inside the pristine, soundproofed offices of UBS, the protocols began to change. Birkenfeld noticed the subtle shifts in the atmospheric pressure. He read the new internal guidelines that seemed deliberately designed to create distance between the bank's executive board and the bankers operating on the ground. The institution was quietly, methodically building a legal firewall. And Birkenfeld realized that he was standing on the wrong side of it. When a leviathan like UBS is threatened, it sheds weight. It sacrifices its outer layers to protect the core. Birkenfeld understood the mechanics of power well enough to know what a scapegoat looked like. He was the American dealing directly with the American clients. If the Department of Justice ever breached the walls, the bank could simply point the finger at rogue employees. They could claim institutional ignorance, leaving men like him exposed to federal indictments. In that moment, a massive moral and practical dilemma emerges. It is the defining choice of every turncoat. Do you remain loyal to an organization that might be preparing your coffin? Do you stay silent, hoping the storm passes? Or do you strike first? But human motivation is rarely simple. In 2006, just as the internal pressure at UBS was building, a crucial piece of legislation was passed in Washington. The United States Congress updated the IRS whistleblower laws, offering massive financial rewards, up to 30% of collected proceeds, to individuals who exposed massive tax fraud. Did Birkenfeld act out of a sudden awakening of conscience? Was he simply a terrified employee trying to outmaneuver a corporate betrayal? Or was he a calculated opportunist who saw a chance to trade his illicit career for a massive government payout? Perhaps it was all three. Whatever the true anchor of his motivation was, the decision was made. Between 2007, when he resigned from UBS, and his formal approaches to the US government, Birkenfeld did not just walk away. He took the ammunition with him. He secured internal documents, client lists, and memos detailing exactly how the evasion schemes were structured. He gathered the financial DNA of people who believed they were untouchable. He was no longer a wealth manager. He was a man carrying a loaded gun aimed directly at the heart of Swiss banking secrecy. And his next destination was the United States Department of Justice. When you walk into the United States Department of Justice offering to expose the world's most powerful bank, you might expect to be treated like a protected asset. But the reality of federal law enforcement is far colder. Birkenfeld did not arrive empty-handed. Over a series of meetings with federal prosecutors and seasoned agents from the IRS, he laid out the complete, unredacted anatomy of the Swiss banking machine. He explained the encrypted ledgers. He detailed the numbered accounts. He described how shell companies were nested within other shell companies across multiple jurisdictions. He handed the American government the master blueprints to a shadow economy. And most importantly, he provided names. The wealthy elites who believed their fortunes were utterly insulated by a nation-state famous for its stubborn neutrality. Now, they were waking up to the terrifying realization that their hidden millions were sitting on a desk in Washington, D.C. The panic within those exclusive circles was incredibly quiet, but it was absolute. High-priced defense lawyers were quietly retained. The ultimate fortress had been breached from the inside. UBS, the untouchable titan of global finance, suddenly found itself cornered. They had built a sprawling empire on the promise of infinite discretion. But discretion cannot stop a federal subpoena backed by hard, irrefutable documentary evidence. The executive board in Switzerland faced an impossible existential choice. They could risk a full-scale criminal indictment by the United States government. An indictment that could revoke their banking license and effectively destroy their ability to operate in the US market. Or they could surrender. In 2009, in a historic move that sent shockwaves through the financial sector, the Swiss banking giant capitulated. They entered into a formal deferred prosecution agreement with the United States Department of Justice. They were forced to publicly admit their role in aggressively facilitating tax evasion for wealthy American clients. And they agreed to pay a staggering penalty, $780 million. The fine was a massive financial hemorrhage, but the true cost was much deeper. The invincible aura of Swiss banking secrecy, a reputation carefully cultivated over centuries, was permanently fractured. But the breach created by Birkenfeld was far more consequential than just the fate of one single bank. It triggered a massive domino effect. The Internal Revenue Service, suddenly armed with intimate insider knowledge of exactly how these offshore schemes operated, it launched a relentless enforcement campaign. They introduced offshore voluntary disclosure programs. They essentially broadcast a terrifying message to the wealthy elites. We know exactly what you are doing, and we know how you are doing it. Come clean right now, or face federal prison. The elites, terrified by the spectacular fall of UBS, began to line up. Thousands of wealthy individuals stepped out of the shadows. They confessed to their hidden offshore accounts. This resulting wave of forced transparency brought in billions of dollars in recovered taxes, interest, and severe penalties for the American government. It was a massive triumph of federal enforcement. Yet, inside the Department of Justice, a fierce debate was taking place regarding the architect of this victory. To the IRS Whistleblower Office, Birkenfeld was a goldmine of actionable intelligence. But to the federal prosecutors, he was a confessed conspirator. They looked at him and saw a man who had profited handsomely from the very crimes he was now exposing. They argued that he had not been entirely forthcoming about his own largest clients from the very beginning of his cooperation. This is the central conflict of the Turncoat. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. If a man helps build a corrupt system, gets rich from it, and only blows the whistle when he feels his own survival is threatened, Does his eventual cooperation wash away his past sins? Does the sheer scale of the money recovered for the public excuse his years of facilitating the fraud? The government ultimately decided that it did not. Birkenfeld had handed them the weapon they needed, and he had broken the silence. But he was about to learn that the system is a cold, calculating machine, and it was about to turn its full weight against the very man who had fed it. The American justice system is an entity of absolute pragmatism. It does not exist to hand out medals. It exists to enforce the law and to maintain order. In August of 2009, Bradley Birkenfeld stood before a federal judge. He had given them UBS. He had handed them the keys to a kingdom of hidden wealth. He had initiated a chain reaction that was actively recovering billions of dollars for the United States Treasury. But the Department of Justice argued that his cooperation, while historically unprecedented, did not erase his own complicity. They pointed out that in his initial disclosures to the government, he had not been entirely transparent about his dealings with his single largest American client. They argued that he was trying to play both sides, seeking protection while still shielding certain aspects of his past. The government decided to make an example of him. They needed to send a message that blowing the whistle does not grant you absolute immunity if your own hands are covered in dirt. The gavel fell. 40 months in federal prison. It was a staggering, sobering sentence. The transition was absolute and brutal. From the pristine, oxygenated air of Geneva, from the tailored suits and the first-class lounges, to the suffocating confines of a federal correctional institution in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. He was stripped of his name, his status, and his power. He became prisoner number 03975-018. For the length of his sentence, Birkenfeld sat in a concrete cell. The psychological toll of that isolation is a heavy burden to carry. To know that you did the one thing no one else in your industry had the courage to do. To know that you brought a corrupt financial empire to its knees. And to realize that your reward is watching the seasons change through a thick wire mesh window. It forces a terrifying moral question into the mind of anyone watching. This is the chilling deterrent built into the system. If the government punishes the truth teller more harshly than the architects of the lie, why would anyone ever choose to cross the line? But the story of a turncoat rarely ends exactly the way the prosecutors plan. While the Department of Justice was locking him away, another branch of the government was operating on a completely different set of rules. The Internal Revenue Service looks at the world through the cold, objective lens of mathematics. They looked at the billions of dollars flooding back into the Treasury. They looked at the catastrophic collapse of the offshore tax evasion industry. And they looked at the law passed in 2006. The law that promised up to 30% of collected proceeds to whistleblowers who exposed massive tax fraud. In September of 2012, in a move that shocked the global financial community and infuriated many lawmakers, the IRS Whistleblower Office made a historic decision. They did not look at his prison sentence. They looked at the sheer, undeniable value of the data he had provided. They issued a ruling and they printed a check. $104 million. It was the largest whistleblower reward ever given to a single individual by the IRS. When the news broke, it created an absolute firestorm. Critics were outraged. How could the government hand a massive fortune to an admitted felon? But the IRS defended their mathematics. They argued that paying Birkenfeld was one of the most profitable investments the American taxpayer had ever made. Without his insider knowledge, the secret vaults of Switzerland would have remained locked forever. He was the only one who possessed the exact map needed to navigate that labyrinth of financial deception. Imagine the sheer, absurd paradox of that moment. A federal inmate having served time for conspiracy must suddenly becomes a centimillionaire, funded directly by the very government that locked him in a cage. This is the uncomfortable reality of the whistleblower. There are no clean endings. There are no pure heroes in this game. Birkenfeld broke the law. He profited from a corrupt system. And then, when the walls began to close in, he broke the system itself. He forced the American government to reckon with a shadow economy they had ignored for decades. He left us with a moral equation that is almost impossible to balance. Is a man defined by the crimes he commits, or by the empire he destroys? If you find yourself deep inside a corrupt machine, holding the lever that could tear it all down, what will you choose? Will you protect the empire and keep your soul intact? Or will you pull the lever, burn the empire to the ground, and risk burning with it? Are you brave enough, or perhaps desperate enough, to become a turncoat? The truth always comes with a price tag. Sometimes that price is your freedom. Sometimes it is $104 million. Sometimes, terrifyingly, it is both. If you want to explore more of these dark, hidden corridors of power, if you want to understand the minds of the people who break the world's most dangerous secrets, then subscribe to Turncoat. We are just getting started.